¿Alguna vez te has sentado solo en la noche, preguntándote por qué tu corazón sigue inclinándose a perdonar, incluso cuando ya has sangrado tantas veces? ¿Por qué tragas tus lágrimas en silencio, creyendo que esa resistencia es prueba de un amor sagrado? Quizás pensaste que la paciencia era la marca de un alma madura, que el perdón incondicional era la corona de la compasión. Pero la verdad cruel es esta: gran parte de lo que llamas perdón no proviene de la fuerza, sino de un lazo inconsciente, una cadena invisible que aprisiona tu alma desde la infancia, cuando aprendiste a sobrevivir complaciendo a los demás. La gente suele ensalzar al empath como símbolo de luz, pero Jung te recordaría que la luz no existe sin haber atravesado la oscuridad. El empático no nace del paraíso, sino del infierno del afecto intermitente. Es aquel niño que debía escuchar cada respiración de su madre para anticipar la tormenta de su ira. Es aquel muchacho que aprendió a descifrar el silencio de su padre como si leyera un texto sagrado. Esa sensibilidad no fue un regalo, sino un mecanismo de supervivencia, un instinto forjado en la oscuridad, luchando contra el miedo al abandono. Y así crecen dentro de una paradoja, frágiles pero creyéndose fuertes, brillantes pero sangrando por heridas que nunca sanaron. Aman borrándose a sí mismos. Perdonan como si fuera un rito religioso, no solo por errores pequeños, sino también por actos que destruyen el alma. En lo inconsciente creen que si un día dejan de perdonar, el amor se marchará y con él su valor. Esa creencia aterradora se resume en una frase: si no curo, no seré amado. Por eso perdonan al narcisista, perdonan al traidor, perdonan al abusador. Encuentran 1000 razones para justificar a quien lleva máscara. Y en ese proceso no notan que ellos también llevan una llamada paz, otra llamada compasión. Pero en lo profundo, no son más que disfraces para ocultar la ira y el miedo primitivo del niño que fue abandonado. Hasta que un día ocurre una ruptura sagrada. Ya no hay lugar para la resistencia. El alma, tras demasiadas veces poner la otra mejilla, se rinde y regresa hacia adentro. No es crueldad, no es venganza, es un llamado de despertar. Es el umbral de la individuación, el proceso que Jung describió como el regreso al yo auténtico. Allí las máscaras comienzan a caer, no solo las de los demás, sino también las tuyas. Y entre los escombros, una verdad desnuda. Tu compasión ha sido utilizada como un arma, tu luz, absorbida para alimentar la oscuridad de otro. Ese momento asusta, pero también es el inicio de la libertad. Porque solo cuando el empático deja de perdonar, empieza a recordar las veces que tragó la verdad para mantener la paz, recordar las veces que se inclinó a pedir perdón por lo mismo que lo hirió, solo para preservar la conexión. Y en ese río de memorias descubre algo estremecedor: el perdón incondicional ya no es amor, sino traición a uno mismo. Y al reconocerlo, por primera vez se atreve a erguirse, a dejar la máscara atrás y mirar de frente a la verdad. El amor verdadero no necesita sangre ni lágrimas para demostrarse. Unconditional forgiveness, at first glance, looks like a spiritual summit, a generosity without limits. But if you look closely, you'll see it often wears the form of masks: the mask of peace, the mask of compassion. And as Jung pointed out, the mask, the persona, has never been the truth. It is only a garment tailored for social acceptance, but that same garment can tighten and suffocate the soul. Beneath that beautiful fabric lies not pure light, but streams of unacknowledged magma. The fear of abandonment, the rage suppressed, the wounds never named. The empath thinks they live in the light, but in reality, they are trapped in a role, the kind one, the pleasant one, the one who always forgives. This is not their authentic self, but an unconscious effigy built to guarantee that they will still be loved. In Jung's language, this is the dangerous identification with the persona. When a person believes the mask is who they are, they lose connection with the shadow, the hidden darkness. There, in the shadows, echoes the cry of the abandoned child. There still burns the fire of a longing to be recognized. There, the unshed tears wait silently for the day they can break free. The paradox is this: the empath fears most what they need most. They fear anger, believing that anger will drive love away. They fear revealing their wounds, believing that weakness will lead to rejection. And so, they keep wearing the mask. They forgive again and again, not only forgiving others, but forgiving their own betrayal of self. Each time they bow their head and let it pass, they carve another piece of soul flesh to offer at the altar of the illusion called love. But Jung warned, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When the empath dares to take off the mask of unconditional forgiveness, the journey begins. It is not an easy road. It is a direct confrontation with the truth that your light was exploited to feed another's darkness, that the kindness that was once your glory was twisted into chains around your neck. And that moment is a sacred rupture. It is not the abandonment of love, but the abandonment of illusion, no longer a self-sacrifice, but a turning inward, the recognition that unconditional forgiveness is not a spiritual peak, but a form of unconscious slavery. It is a performance repeated to hold on to love, but that love was only a phantom made of smoke. When you dare to look into that void, when you quietly listen to the deception of the persona of the one who always forgives, you hear the whisper of the authentic self. That voice is not gentle. It thunders, I exist too. I am worthy too. I do not need to erase myself to be loved. It is the voice of the soul craving boundaries, the voice of the inner child who longs to cry, to rage, to be embraced in unconditional acceptance, not from others, but from you. And when that voice is heard, the mask begins to fall. Not only the mask of others, but yours as well. In the unobstructed gaze, a truth blazes forth. True love never equates to self-erasure. Compassion never equates to becoming a victim. And forgiveness stripped of boundaries is not nobility, but betrayal of the soul. Here is what few dare to say aloud. Your silence and forgiveness are the stage on which others perform. You do not realize that each time you bow, you are lighting the spotlight for them to play victim or false hero. But when you step off the stage, the play ends. The narcissist no longer has a mirror for their false allure. The manipulator no longer has an audience to twist the truth. When you stop hiding your pain, truth reveals itself without accusation. And in that stopping, something strange happens. Their masks fall off by themselves, not because you ripped them, but because they no longer have anywhere to cling. Jung called this the return of the shadow, when what has been buried in the unconscious can no longer be denied. The narcissist once cloaked in charm now appears as nothing more than a desperate addict for supply. The traitor once sweet now stands exposed as a coward avoiding truth. And you once seen as weak now stand as an unforgiving mirror. The clarity in your eyes makes them visible. This is a painful moment, for it forces you to grieve every illusion you once clung to. You must bury the image of someone who could change, a relationship that could be saved, a love that could heal all wounds. But within the funeral of illusion, a seed of life begins to sprout. For when the illusion dies, you see for the first time the naked truth. Love does not redeem if it demands you betray yourself. The empath, then, is no longer a sponge absorbing the pain of others. They become a mirror, reflecting truth while keeping their own shape. They learn that compassion no longer means saving anyone, but discerning with wisdom, who is worthy of their light and who only seeks to drain it. And when they dare to speak a single, simple, sacred word, no, the invisible power once lost returns. The energy once poured out in forgiveness is reclaimed in the form of boundaries. They discover that forgiveness is no longer an excuse to preserve connection, but holds value only when it arises from inner freedom. True forgiveness is no longer tethered to others, but is an act of liberating oneself from chains. Jung emphasized No one can become fully themselves while living in the projection of another. When the empath stops unconditional forgiveness, they stop projecting the image of the wounded child to be saved onto the narcissist. They hand back the darkness to its rightful owner, no longer carrying it on their shoulders like a cross. And in that release, a rebirth begins. The empath is reborn not in sweetness, but in fire. The fire of anger finally acknowledged. The fire of pain finally named. The fire of truth finally unveiled. And from that fire emerges a new self, no longer the one who forgives to be loved, but a sovereign soul, one who knows their worth, who knows their boundaries, who knows that love cannot exist if it demands self-erasure. This is the very process of individuation that Jung described the death of the false self and the birth of the authentic one. The empath does not become cruel, they become whole. They no longer live to please others. They begin to live in loyalty to themselves. And in that loyalty, every mask around them continues to fall, one by one, until only raw truth remains. But the falling of others' masks is only half the journey. The other half, and the most painful, is the inward path. For the greatest enemy of the empath has never only been the narcissist outside, but the buried fragments of their own soul, the abandoned child still weeping in the dark, the rage extinguished until it turned to cold ash, the fear of abandonment lurking in every relationship. When facing the outer world, you can walk away. But when facing yourself, there is no escape but the courage to look directly. When Jung spoke of shadow work, he did not mean something mystical, but a courageous process. The process of daring to face the parts of ourselves we once denied, rejected, or hid beneath the names of morality or love. For the empath, this is an even greater challenge than for most, because they are so accustomed to straining themselves to be the good one, the understanding one, the forgiving one. In that effort, they have imprisoned the very forces that keep them alive, their authentic anger, their rightful selfish needs, the cries of their soul. All these parts were thrown into the basement of the mind, locked with promises of love. And yet, it is precisely these repressed elements that hold the key to liberation, for the unconscious never sleeps. It knocks through dreams, through strange obsessions, through bursts of anger that flare and are quickly suppressed. In those dreams, the empath finds themselves wandering through houses with locked rooms. They encounter wolves wearing the faces of old lovers, mirrors bursting into flames as they look into them. These images are not illusions, but invisible letters from the soul, warnings that your forgiveness has turned into a prison, your silence has become betrayal of yourself. Jung called these signals the language of the unconscious. And the unconscious will not stop until you are willing to descend into your own underworld. That journey is never easy, for it brings you face to face with the very darkness you fear most. But when you are brave enough to descend, you encounter an image long exiled, the sacred child. The sacred child is not a cute metaphor. It is an ancient archetype, the self in its original form, the self that was never wounded, never warped by expectation, never taught that love must be purchased with sacrifice. This child does not beg, does not shrink, does not flatter to be loved. It stands there radiant, fierce, unbroken, and in its eyes you recognize a power long asleep within you. The power that needs no proof, no dependence on pleasing anyone, the power simply to exist. The moment of meeting the sacred child is a tremor to the core, because in that instant you see clearly unconditional forgiveness is not the sacred mission you once believed, but merely a postponement. It keeps you circling the wound instead of cleansing it. It makes you believe you are noble, while in truth you are avoiding the fact that you too have darkness, you too have anger, you too have the need to be loved unconditionally. The empath only truly steps into maturity when they dare to embrace the sacred child. Then the darkness within ceases to be the enemy and becomes an ally. The suppressed rage transforms into a driving force. The pain once denied becomes clarity. The tears once branded weakness now become a ritual of purification. This is the alchemical fire of the soul, where the false is burned away and the spirit is forged into gold. From here, rebirth begins. The empath no longer forgives just to preserve fragile bonds, but only forgives when their soul is truly ready. They no longer give in order to be accepted, but give only when their heart is overflowing. They no longer tremble before the threat of abandonment, for they have discovered the place where love never runs dry within themselves. This is a radical transformation, for when you rediscover the sacred child, you also rediscover the source of creativity, of joy in living, of pure intuition. You begin to live not to be a mirror reflecting the desires of others, but to be yourself clear, whole, and unhidden. And in that presence, true love finally has a chance to appear. No longer love based on exchange, no longer love rooted in fear, but love as freedom, love that does not require you to betray your soul in order to keep it. Shadow work, therefore, is not a journey to make you a better person by outer standards, but to restore to you your inner wholeness. It does not teach you to forgive more, but to forgive at the right time. It does not teach you to remain silent, but to know when to speak. It does not turn you into a saint, but brings you back to being a complete human being, both light and dark, both strong and fragile, both angry and loving. At that point, you no longer fear your own darkness, nor allow others to manipulate it. You look straight into truth, and from within that truth, you emerge as a sovereign soul. A soul that no longer needs to prove anything to the world, because it has found its true home within itself. And that is what healing truly is. But if the journey ends only with meeting the sacred child, it is not yet complete. For Jung reminded us, darkness does not only contain the forgotten fragments of the soul, it also hides a primordial power, a force that can either build or destroy, depending on whether we are conscious of it. The empath, in entering shadow work, does not only reclaim their vulnerability, but must also confront the impulses they once trembled to admit: ambition, desire for control, hunger for recognition. Here, a new paradox appears. While the narcissist is devoured by darkness because they deny the light, the empath has often been blinded by false light to the point of denying their darkness. These two extremes seem different, but are in fact two faces of the same tragedy, living only half a life, abandoning the other half. That is why Jung did not advise us to choose the light or choose the dark, but to embrace totality. The empath must learn that anger does not equal cruelty, that selfishness does not equal betrayal, that the need to be loved does not equal weakness. Each dark fragment, once acknowledged, returns a piece of lost power. This is the hardest step, because it forces you to abandon the perfect image you once built for yourself, the image of the one who always forgives, the one who is always gentle, the one who never gets angry. Abandoning that image is like dismantling a temple you once worshipped for years. Yet, as with all mythic rites, this destruction is the condition for rebirth. In this process, dreams continue to act as a mirror. Some people recount dreaming they are being chased, only to find that the pursuer is themselves. Others dream of falling into a deep abyss, only to discover they have wings that have never been opened. Such images, taken literally, seem frightening. But Jung would say, these are invitations from the unconscious, forcing you to see that what you avoid is the very thing that can set you free. When you are brave enough to sit with fear, you discover a truth. Fear is only a doorway. Behind it lies life, energy. Just as darkness is not the absence of light, but the place where light waits to be born. The empath, once they dare to walk through that darkness, will find a freedom unlike any other. Freedom from performing to be loved, freedom from forgiving to keep peace, freedom from disappearing to avoid abandonment. And as they begin to taste that freedom, a great question arises. If I am no longer the mirror for others, then who am I? This is the essence of individuation. For only when we accept that we are no longer defined by the eyes of others do we truly begin to write our own definition. In the process Jung called individuation, There is always a stage that cannot be avoided, the symbolic death of the old ego. This is not biological death, but the dissolution of the self-image we have clung to all our lives. For the empath, that image is often the good one, the forgiving one, the one who sacrifices to be loved. That image is like a fragile armor, both shielding them from abandonment and trapping them in an invisible cage. But eventually, that armor no longer fits. It constricts until it suffocates. And to live, they must let it die. This is the funeral every mature soul must pass through, the funeral of illusions about the self. In this rite, the pain is real, for letting go of a familiar ego is like burying a loved one. The empath weeps not only for losing others, but for losing the version of themselves they once believed was me. They must bid farewell to the beliefs that once sustained them, that forgiveness would bring love, that kindness would guarantee safety, that silence would preserve connection. All of it collapses, and in the emptiness that remains lies only bareness. Jung emphasized, there is no rebirth without a prior death, and the death here is the collapse of the false self. The empath may experience it as an existential crisis, a feeling of emptiness, disorientation, no longer knowing who they are. This stage can easily make them believe they are broken or failing. But in truth, it is the necessary dissolution for a new form of life to appear. Across many mythologies, we see this motif. The hero must descend into the underworld, die once, and only then return with new strength. Orpheus enters Hades. Inanna hangs lifeless in the dark for 3 days. Jesus descends to the tomb before resurrection. These symbols are not random. They reflect a spiritual truth. To become oneself, one must undergo a symbolic death, the death of illusions that shaped us but no longer nourish us. For the empath, this symbolic death is often tied to the realization that the love they clung to for so long was never love at all, but an exchange of power. They must face the truth that they had been living in a false script, one where forgiveness was used as a weapon against them. This is a painful shattering, for it breaks apart their deepest belief. Yet it is precisely in that moment that a new door opens. Within the emptiness of loss, a new inner space is formed. As the old ego collapses, the unconscious rises, bringing with it images, dreams, and intuitions that never had a chance to live. The empath begins to hear voices they once silenced, the voice demanding boundaries, the voice affirming that anger is justified, the voice reminding them that self-love is not a sin. This is the language of the soul, freed only after the old shell has been broken. This symbolic death, if embraced, does not lead to destruction but to liberation. It is the sword stroke that severs the chains binding them to the past. It is the fire that burns away the masks that once suffocated the soul, and in the ashes a new seed begins to sprout, the seed of the authentic self. From there, rebirth unfolds. No longer relying on forgiveness to hold on to love, the empath learns to forgive as a free choice. No longer afraid to express anger, they learn to let it become a protective boundary. No longer obsessed with pleasing others, they begin to live for themselves. And in this process, they discover what Jung called wholeness, the integration of light and shadow, of compassion and strength, of love and truth. After all, the journey of the empath is not a journey to become the great forgiver, nor to prove themselves nobler than anyone else. It is a journey of return, a return to the forgotten shadow, a return to the exiled child, a return to the authentic self that never truly disappeared. When the mask falls, when the old ego dies in its symbolic funeral, you realize unconditional forgiveness is no longer the crown of love, but the chain of fear. And when that chain dissolves, a silent yet unshakable power begins to return, the power to live without proving, to be loved without sacrificing, to exist as a whole soul. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by fleeing from the darkness, but by making the darkness conscious." It is in the moment you dare to step into your own darkness that the alchemical fire ignites, burning away illusion and forging the soul into gold. You are no longer the sponge that absorbs the pain of others, nor the mirror that reflects their distortions. You become an independent light, not radiant for applause, but clear to illuminate your own path. This is the highest freedom. Not freedom from the narcissist, but freedom from illusion. Not freedom to escape, but freedom to stand firm. From here, love is no longer something you beg for, but a current you generate. Compassion no longer means sacrifice, but discernment. And forgiveness, when it comes, is no longer a betrayal of yourself, but an act of soul liberation freeing you from bondage to the past. This journey is painful, but also sacred. For in the death of illusion, a new self is born, a self that knows how to rage, how to cry, how to say no, and also how to love in freedom. That is the sovereign soul. And when you reach this point, you understand your light was never lost. It was only waiting for you to stop betraying yourself so it could shine again.